injuries to the nerves and injuries to the ligaments. If you see any fracture case, the associated complications are usually one of them is a nerve injury. So, the nerve injuries are part and parcel of the trauma. This picture you know very well that peripheral nerve cut section, and the epineurium is the outermost cover, and you have a fascicles, and that is covered by perineurium, and this is endoneurium. This is the true nerve fiber. This one, this is the axon, and that is covered by Schwann cell. This thing you know very well. When a nerve is cut, we don't know what grade the nerve is cut, whether it is a simple injury or it is a complicated one. There are two important classifications which we commonly use. The first one is Sedan classification of peripheral nerve injury. That is easiest and simplest. If you look at the picture carefully, the first one, neuropraxia, where there is no structural damage to the nerve, it is simply a physiological disruption. If you if you compress the limb for more than 3 hours or 2 hours, what happens? The action potential, movement of the action potential is cut. That's all. There is no structural damage to the nerve per se. It is only a disruption or disturbance to the flow of the signal, and that is called neuropraxia. Since there is no structural damage and the recovery is good, it will recover. And look at the second picture. This is axonotmosis. Here the axon is cut, the outer sheath is intact. So, this is known as axonotmosis. Here the axon is cut, whereas the nerve is in continuity. Nerve is, if you look from outside, nerve is okay, but if you go inside only, you know that the axon is disrupted. And the third one, neuronotmosis. Here the entire neuron is cut. Neurotmosis or neuronotmosis, the entire nerve is cut. So, this is the Sedan's classification, and there is one more classification by a person called Sunderland, and what he did, he subdivided the axonotmosis into 2, 3, 4. So, totally it is about 5 types in Sunderland's classification. But what we commonly use in the clinical setting is Sedan's classification, neuropraxia, axonotmosis and neuronotmosis. Okay, we will explain the Sedan's classification. See, I just told you that it is a temporary and physiological disruption, not any anatomical damage to the nerve. So, since there is no anatomical or structural damage, the nerve recovery is full. How do you get this? If you use axillary crutch, patients are using crutches, and Saturninite palsy, pressing the humerus for longer time, maybe on evening, Saturday night, when you booze, when you get up in the morning, and because of the pressure on the nerve, it is more of a pressure symptom, and tourniquet. So, inadvertently, you use tourniquet for some limb surgeries, and after the end of the 1.5 or 2 hours, the nerve is going for temporary ischemia. That's all, and it will restore once the pressure is out, but it will take few days to few weeks. But by rule, the recovery is full. As I told you, there is no damage to the structures of the nerve. That is known as neuropraxia. Then come to the axonotmosis. Here, the inside tube, inside axon is the most fragile tissue, and the outer covering are made up of fibrous tissue, whereas the true nerve is the axon. Here the axon is cut and outer sheath is intact, and recovery is possible because nerve is still in continuity. There is no break. There is no break. It is in continuity. So recovery is possible, but we don't know how much it recovers. It is maybe incomplete. Sometime it may be complete also, but we don't know. So where do you get? For example, when you stretch a nerve like this, or I draw the diagram. This is axon, okay. This is axon, and this is the sheath. When you pull the nerve in this direction, this is very fragile tissue, so it cuts, it gives way, whereas outer sheath is made up of fibrous tissue, it will yield. So when you pull the nerve along its axis, what happens? The center part of the nerve is cut. So that is oxalomosis. How does it happen? So in dislocations, joint dislocation, when the nerve is passing through the joint, when the dislocated bone will have a stretching effect. It is because of the stretching of the nerve, not on pressure. The pressure is in the neuropraxia. When you stretch the nerve more than it can yield, and the center part of the axon gives way, and since outer sheath is there, the nerve will be still intact. So in closed fractures and closed dislocations, the axonotmosis can happen. And the third is neuronotmosis. Here, if anybody cuts your forearm, hand, or any limb, it is a open injury, or if you directly cut the nerve in toto, so that is known as neuronotmosis, or a sharp, a bony fragment which is fractured. When it is fractured along the course of the nerve, the sharp bony fragment will cut the nerve. That is neuronotmosis. Here recovery is not at all possible because the nerve is totally displaced, totally not in contact. So they need surgery like nerve suturing, neuroraphy. So where do you get this neuronotmosis? You get open fractures or sometimes cut injuries you get. Okay, if you look at this picture, you can get some more information that this is look at this picture, and this is a structure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and neuropraxia, oxalomosis, neuronotmosis. As the degree goes higher, the number of structures damaged becomes more. Means in neuropraxia there is no structure damage, whereas in oxalomosis up to endoneurium these structures are damaged. In neuronotmosis the entire nerve is damaged, and recovery here it is 100% recovery, whereas in neuronotmosis there is recovery is almost none. So as the structural number of the structural damage is more and the recovery is less. And this you know very well how to cut the nerve when you get Wallerian degeneration, the distal part, and traumatic degeneration on the other part. And it is not true that nerve will not regenerate. Nerve will regenerate, nerve will regrow, and it has to be in a perfect conducive atmosphere for the nerve to regrow. If there is a persistent gap, it will never reattach. Whereas if they are in continuity, it will regrow and regenerate. Okay, how do you know that? How do you know that the nerve is regenerating? You suspect a nerve injury and you want to see whether the nerve is recovering or not. How do you find out the nerve is regenerating? It is by doing what is known as Tinel sign or Tinel's test. Here you percuss from distal to proximal. If for example, if you suspect that a nerve, this median nerve is damaged, you percuss from distal to proximal, and at the site of the nerve regeneration you will get tingling like sensation, and that will tell you that there is a possibility of nerve is regenerating. Why a person should get tingling sensation? You know very well, That nerve, peripheral nerve is myelinated now. When it has been cut, the myelination is lost, and the new nerve, when it is regenerating, initially it is not a myelinated one. And as the nerve regenerates further, the myelination takes place. So, unmyelinated nerve, when you tap on the nude, raw nerve, you can elicit tinal sign. If the nerve gets myelination and then you tap, you won't get any sort of tinal sign. So, tinal sign you can get when the nerve is unmyelinated. When, how do you say that unmyelinated? Because it is regenerating now. If the nerve is regenerating, obviously the first thing is it is unmyelinated, then it gets myelination. So indirectly we can tell that nerve is regenerating. So that is the usefulness of tinal sign. Once the nerve gets myelinated, you won't be able to elicit any sort of a tinal sign. So it is a surrogate idea that you get the nerve is recovery. Okay, look at this picture, the same thing, neuropraxia, oxygenated neuron osmosis. Here, the tinal sign will be absent in neuropraxia. Why? Because in neuropraxia, there is no structural damage, there is no regeneration, there is no myelination, nothing. So, you won't get any tinal sign in neuropraxia, and other things you will get if the nerve is regenerating, you will get tinal sign. And you should advance distally, because nerve is growing from proximal to distal direction. So, in the tinal sign should be advancing distally, so that it tells you that the nerve is growing distal in the distal direction. Okay, we will solve some questions. Saturninate palsy. Saturninate palsy means there is no, you know very well that people nowadays people don't drink on Saturday. People drink every day, and they drink morning, evening, afternoon. And when you drink in a comatose level, you keep your arm under some chair, sofa, or whatever the place you get, and you sleep. And this is the bicipital groove is the region through which the radial nerve is crossing. So that is some sort of a very accessible area, and if you apply pressure for longer time, maybe whole night, overnight, and you apply pressure continuously to the radial nerve, and you get radial nerve palsy when you get up. And that is, again, I just told you that it is a neuropraxia type of lesion. You won't get any sort of a permanent problem, and you will get complete recovery, and it depends on it takes some few days to few weeks. Okay, fine. Tinal sign. What is the usefulness of tinal sign? I just told you. What is the usefulness of tinal sign? It is easy to assess the severity of nerve damage? No. Is it to classify nerve injury? No. It is to assess the nerve recovery, whether the nerve is recovering or not. If there is no tinal sign, it means either the nerve is not injured or the nerve is not recovering. That is the idea. Crutch palsy. Crutch palsy, the amputees and the people who are having unstable gait are using axillary crutches, and the crutches is pressing upon the not axilla, it is on the radial nerve. And the crutch palsy damages not axillary nerve, it is pressing on the radial nerve. The same phenomenon, the same mechanism of action, you get neuropraxia. Okay. Look at this picture, and brachial plexus. You don't worry about this, because you don't need to mug up everything in brachial plexus. That is the biggest headache from anatomy student to the psychiatrist, neurologist, surgeon, anesthetist. Everyone will have a difficulty in understanding this. I don't think you need to mug up or make some sort of mnemonic. It's easy. The thing is, what we are going to see today is C5 and C6 and C8 and T1, and this is mm, two lesions we are going to see today. One, C5 and C6, C8 and T1. C5, C6 root is the other is known as, that point is known as Eppes point, and there are two mechanisms as far as the brachial plexus injury is concerned. Look at the picture, that it belongs to my right side, my right side brachial plexus. If I if I hyperabduct, you have the C5, C6, C7, T8. Okay. If you hyperabduct, the C8 and T1 fibers will be stretched. Okay, number one. If I increase the angle, that is angle between head and shoulder. If I increase the angle, what section is on the topmost? C5 and C6. So C5 and C6 will be stretched first. Okay. So in hyperabduction injuries, you get C8 and T1 stretching, whereas when you have a or when you pull the head or when you pull the shoulder, the C5 and C6 is the first fibers to be stretched. So there are two mechanisms to get brachial plexus injury. Okay. So look at this picture. Yeah, if you hyperabduct like this, or when you pull the uh, during delivery, when you pull the baby's hand like this, what will happen? The angle between this shoulder, arm and chest becomes more, and here is the C5, C6 root. So, sorry, C8 and T1 root. So, you get C8 and T1 root injury, and what you get is Klumpke's paralysis. And on the other hand, if you have a difficult delivery such as shoulder dystocia, delivery of the shoulder is very difficult. When you pull the baby with head like this, the angle between the head and the shoulder becomes more, and the topmost fibers are C5 and C6. You get C5, C6. These two are well known birth obstetric brachial plexus injuries, but it can happen in other clinical settings such as you fall from height and hanging on with one hand, something like that. It can happen. Sometimes when you fall on the floor also, where you go and hit your head on the floor first, then the angle becomes more and you get a brachial plexus injury. Okay, I am telling you the Erb's palsy, the other is known as Duchenne's palsy, the same thing. If heavy object fall on your shoulder, obviously you get C5 and C6 injury, and the same lower brachial plexus is Klumpke's paralysis. Yeah, this is a simplified brachial plexus picture, and this is Erb's point. Okay, fine. So C8 T1 contributes to ulnar nerve. So in Klumpke's paralysis, the major clinical manifestation is that of ulnar nerve palsy. Okay. Okay. So there are two palsies we are going to see. One is Erb's palsy and is Klumpke's paralysis. See, the Erb's palsy is damage to the 5 and 6. The 5 and 6 supplies the upper part of the upper limb. It supplies the shoulder, it supplies the elbow. That's all. So the fingers, hands and fingers are supplied by lower fibers C7, 8 and T1. So in these patients, the fingers will be fine. Maybe in the wrist also will be fine. Only the shoulder and elbow. So the classical description is waiter's tip position or policeman receiving tip position. This is the position, the classical brachial plexus injury, or I can show you. Yeah, this is the position. So what is the position? The child cannot abduct. So the child is in an adducted position, shoulder is in adducted position, and elbow is in extended position, and the forearm, this is supination and this is pronation. So shoulder is adducted and elbow is extended and forearm is pronated, and hands and fingers are free. So it is to the finger should be free to receive the tips. So you can remember that way, that the hands muscles are free. So this is the classical waiter's tip position or policeman receiving tips position. Nowadays I don't think the policemen are receiving tips like this. They will catch hold of your hand and neck and get it. And the second one is Klumpke's paralysis, Klumpke, KL, and claw hand. Here its C8 and T1 is affected, obviously you will get a claw hand deformity. And what is the fiber which are just below the C8 and T1? It is more of a sympathetic ganglion, sympathetic fibers. If the pull is more, you can sometimes damage the sympathetic fibers also. So, in severe Klumpke's injuries, you can get also an associated Horner syndrome. You got the point? Fine. So, Erb's palsy, Veita's deposition and Klumpke's paralysis is Klahan. So, any nerve injury, immediately you can use splint in order to prevent contracture. So, the aeroplane splint, you know very well that shoulder is adducted. So, in order to keep it in abducted position, you use this is known as aeroplane splint. This can be used for any other shoulder problem also. Whenever you want to give rest to the shoulder in abducted position, you can use it. But classically, what we use this is for Erb's palsy and claw hand. Claw hand, the problem is in the claw hand is hyperextension of the metacarpophalangeal joint. So, you flex the metacarpophalangeal joint, that is, so this is called knuckle. So, when you flex the knuckle, that is metacarpophalangeal joint, when you bend it, it is known as knuckle benders. We will see in ulnar nerve injury, do not worry. In Erb's palsy, which movement is not lost? Supination of forearm, external rotation of arm, abduction of shoulder, pronation of forearm. All movements are lost. Which is not lost or which is retained? Any idea? Yeah, once you just imagine the Veita's strip position. So, here the forearm is in a pronated position. So, it is pronated, not supinated. So, that movement is not lost. The answer is D. The mode of injury in Klumpke's paralysis, it is hyperabduction of the hand, or you pull the baby's hand alone. So, when you forcibly pull the hand or when you hang from any height, entire body weight is being stretched upon and it gives more stress. So, what is your answer? Forcible hyperabduction of the upper arm. If you increase the angle between neck and shoulder, what do you get? You get Erb's palsy. We are moving to axillary nerve. Axillary nerve is a mixed nerve. It supplies motor and it supplies sensation also. So, what muscles does it supply? It supplies the deltoid and teres minor, and it also gives some cutaneous branches. Upper lateral cutaneous nerve form. This is the region it supplies. This region it supplies the sensation, and we have seen yesterday that any injury in the shoulder, it may be a shoulder dislocation or it may be a fracture of the proximal humerus, you get axillary nerve injury. So, it supplies the deltoid muscle. So, whenever the deltoid muscle is paralyzed, the axillary nerve is injured, the deltoid will get paralyzed, and because the axillary nerve supplies the sensation, the lateral aspect of the deltoid, arm, upper arm, you get loss of sensation. And how do you test it? Yeah, the same thing I just told you. The musculocutaneous nerve, you know very well, 3 muscles are being supplied, and this ear region is known as regimental badge area. This is shoulder dislocation. See, the nerve is very close. This is axillary nerve. This is very close to the shoulder joint. Obviously, you will get axillary nerve injury when you get a shoulder injury problem. And this is how you test. This region is known as regimental badge area. In army regiments, the people will have a different hierarchy, will have a different identification. That badge will tell you that what grade he is in. So, this region is known as badge, regimental badge region, and when you get axillary nerve injury, you can just test whether the sensation is normal or not. And the shoulder, if the deltoid is atrophied, you will have a loss of normal contour, and if you ask the patient to abduct, patient won't be able to abduct because deltoid is paralyzed. Okay, and we also have one nerve, musculocutaneous nerve, and that supplies 3 muscles, which is again coming in front of the shoulder joint. Okay, now we are going to see the nerves of the upper limb. You should instead of watching the slides, you should look at me, and entire upper limb I am going to talk about. One nerve, that is radial nerve, takes care of entire posterior aspect of the upper limb. Okay, it supplies the triceps, it supplies all the muscles in the forearm and the extensor aspect, it also supplies the posterior aspect of the hand and fingers. Okay, and the radial nerve starts from the brachial plexus. It has all the roots because it has to take care of the entire upper limb and the posterior aspect. So it will have a C5, C6, C7, T8 and C8 and T1. All the roots you should have. Then only you can take care of the entire upper limb posterior aspect. Okay, the radial nerve first supplies the triceps muscle and it supplies the anconeus, it supplies the brachioradialis. In the elbow joint, the nerve divides into two terminal branches, and one is sensory branch, the other is motor branch. The sensory branch is superficial radial nerve and the motor branch is posterior interosseous nerve. And after the elbow joint, you will not get any radial nerve because the radial nerve stops at the level of elbow, and below elbow you get only the branches of radial nerve. Okay, so the triceps extend the elbow, okay, and it supplies the wrist extensors, extension of the wrist, extensor carpi radialis, longest extensor carpi ulnaris, and all that. These muscle function is to extend the wrist. They are supplied by radial nerve at or above the elbow. So any injury at or below elbow will not affect the wrist extension because they are supplied by the nerve well above the elbow joint. Coming back to the branches, the posterior interosseous nerve is the motor branch. It supplies the finger extensor. The finger starts at which level? Metacarpophalangeal joint. This is finger. Okay, the finger starts at metacarpophalangeal joint. Finger extensor, digitorum, extensor digitorum. Digit means fingers. So the finger extensor are supplied by posterior interosseous nerve, and thumb extensor are supplied by posterior interosseous nerve. Okay, and first, anatomical snub box, that is the first web space and the dorsal aspect, that area is skin is supplied by superficial radial nerve, that is the sensory branch of the radial nerve. Okay, so if any injury below elbow, the wrist extension is retained, but finger extension is lost because below elbow you get only posterior interosseous nerve injury, not the radial nerve injury. Clear? Then look at the anterior aspect of the arm. In the arm you have three muscles: biceps, brachii and coracobrachialis. All three muscles are supplied by one nerve, that is musculocutaneous nerve. Musculocutaneous nerve takes care of all the muscles of the arm on the anterior aspect, and you have a brachialis muscle that has dual supply. What now it is again supplied supply the brachialis radial nerve. Radial nerve gives one more branch. So brachialis muscle has a dual supply, one from musculocutaneous nerve, the other from radial nerve. Over. Now the arm is over. Coming to the forearm. In the forearm, all the forearm muscles are supplied by median nerve with two exceptions. One, flexor carpi ulnaris and FDP, flexor digitorum profundus, flexor digitorum profundus, FDP. FDP has two parts, medial off, lateral off. The medial off is supplied by ulnar nerve and lateral off is supplied by median nerve. Over. So the forearm is over. You come to hands. In the hands, all the hypothenar muscles are supplied by ulnar nerve, and all thenar muscles are supplied by median nerve. Clear? All the interossei, palmar interossei, dorsal interossei muscles are supplied by ulnar nerve. That's all. So now you have one exception. See, the ulnar nerve first supplies the thenar muscles, hypothenar muscles. The ulnar nerve supplies all the hypothenar muscles, and it goes and ends in the thenar eminence. There it supplies adductor pollicis. What do you mean by adductor pollicis? It is the thumb has to adduct. So the thumb has to move towards ulna or ulnar nerve. So it is the ulnar nerve duty to bring the thumb towards it. You understand? So adductor pollicis function is to adduct the thumb, which median nerve will not do because it is going to the opposite direction. So, obviously, it is a duty of ulnar nerve to bring the thumb towards it. So, all hypothenar muscles are supplied by ulnar nerve and all thenar muscles are supplied by median nerve with one exception, that is adductor pollicis. Clear? Now, you have 4 lumbrical muscles. What is the significant difference of lumbrical muscle from other muscles? No, actually the lumbrical muscles arise from a tendon. Usually muscles start from a bone and insert into a tendon, or it may insert into a bone, whereas the lumbrical is the only muscle which starts from a tendon. Which tendon does it start from? It starts from FDP. Okay, you get FDP gives origin to lumbricals. So, you know very well that you have a 4 FDP tendons for 4 fingers. Okay. So, medial to lateral to. You know very well that medial to tendons FDP are supplied by ulnar nerve and lateral to tendons are supplied by medial nerve. You clear? Okay, fine. So, the medial to tendons of FDP give rise to medial to lumbricals. So, obviously, the medial to lumbricals will be supplied by ulnar nerve and lateral to lumbricals will be supplied by median nerve. Okay. With this overview, we will go and see the individual nerves. If you look carefully, the picture that this is median and ulnar nerve, they are on the anterior aspect, and this is radial nerve which is traveling very close to the nerve, winds around and comes anteriorly and then divide. Okay, fine. Another picture showing median nerve, ulnar nerve and radial nerve. This is ulnar nerve, it is away from the bone, and this is anterior to the bone. The radial nerve is the one which is very closely related to the shaft of the humerus. That is why in shaft of humerus fracture you get radial nerve more often than other nerve injury. Okay. Coming to the radial nerve, I just told you that it will have a all nerve roots C5, 6, C7 and T8, C8 and T1, and at this is elbow, at the level of the elbow it divides into posterior interosseous nerve and superficial radial nerve. The posterior interosseous nerve goes travel in between the 2 heads of supinator, and what is interosseous? It is posterior means behind, and interosseous it is coming behind the interosseous muscle, interosseous membrane, sorry, interosseous membrane. So, that is why it is known as posterior interosseous nerve, because it is traveling in the posterior aspect of the interosseous membrane. Okay, and these small muscles are supplied by PIN, posterior interosseous nerve. The same thing has been given in a different. Yeah, I just told you that any humeral shaft fracture, you get this sort of a the nerve may get trapped in between the bony fragments and get in. This is known as Holstein-Lewis. Holstein-Lewis syndrome. Holstein-Lewis syndrome. What does it mean? That the nerve may get trapped between the bony fragments, and before the fracture the nerve would have been spared. When you want to reduce it by a manipulation, and accidentally you may bring the nerve into the gap and you may crush the nerve. So, that is known as Holstein-Lewis syndrome. Okay, the nerve is divided into 2 and it is compressed sometime by the arcade of Roche, sometime it may be compressed by supinator hypertrophy, etc. The same picture I am giving you, radial nerve divides into 2 branches, fine. The same thing, look at this picture, that brachioradialis and triceps, lateral, long head and middle head are supplied by the radial nerve above, and at the level of elbow you can have a just above, before it divides into 2 it gives supplies to the extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis. It also supplies to the supinator muscle when it becomes posterior interosseous. Before that it gives it supplies the wrist extensor. That is why In posterior interosseous nerve injury, the wrist extension is spared. Now we will see what conditions cause radial nerve injury problem. In the crutch palsy, in the axilla you get radial nerve injury. In satellite palsy, in the radial groove, bicipital groove, you get the radial nerve injury, and usually it is commonly associated with shaft of humerus fracture. And in shaft of humerus fracture, when the radial nerve is injured, you get wrist drop, you get finger drop, and you get thumb drop, because all the branches are damaged. And if you come down after the elbow joint, the only part is posterior interosseous nerve. If they injure, the wrist will be normal, that finger will not be able to extend. So you get finger drop and thumb drop. Thumb is also a finger, so thumb drop and finger drop you get only in posterior interosseous nerve injury. And what do you mean by the word hitchhiking? Hitchhiker sign, hitchhiking. You might have seen in the evening time the school kids will be asking for a lift. So this is known as hitchhiking. So when you cannot abduct or when you cannot extend the thumb, you cannot do it, hitchhiking. So that is known as hitchhiking, the thumb, hitchhiker thumb, where you cannot keep thumbs up sign. Okay, sometime the superficial branch of the radial nerve, that is superficial radial nerve, that is the sensory branch of the radial nerve, may get compressed by the structures in the forearm. So that is known as Wartenberg syndrome, or it is because of the compression neuropathy of the superficial radial nerve. So you get only the sensory problem, not the motor problem. What sensory problem will have? You will have a paresthesia or some sort of numbness in the anatomical snub box, and that is known as chiralgia paresthetica. And you know the term myalgia paresthetica, that is because of the compression of the lateral cutaneous nerve of thigh, that we will see later. We have a separate section known as intraopen neuropathy, we will see later. Okay, when the patient is coming to you with wrist drop, obviously if you allow the wrist to in a palmar flexed manner, and will go for contraction. So you should never allow the muscle to go for contraction. You should keep it in the opposite direction. So when the wrist is dropped, you keep it up. So what splint will you use? You use cock up splint. Cock up splint till the nerve is recovery, or till you plan for a surgery, that that limb should be kept in a functional position. Okay, in the axillary injury to the axillary nerve, the following are seen, except which is not seen in the axillary nerve injury. Yeah, overhead abduction, because the initiation of abduction of shoulder is by supraspinatus, and up to 90 degree it is by deltoid, and after that it is not a shoulder movement. After that it is a scapulothoracic movement, the movement between scapula and thoracic. So scapulothoracic movement is carried out by serratus anterior, trapezius, and lot of muscles are there. Overhead abduction. So overhead abduction has nothing to do with deltoid muscle. So patient even with axillary nerve injury can do overhead abduction, but initiation of abduction is done by supraspinatus, and up to the 90 degree, maybe up to 90 degree it is by deltoid, and 180 degree it is combination of other muscles. Okay, so that is the best answer, loss of overhead abduction. Most common nerve involved in the surgical neck of humerus. See, anything around the shoulder joint. If you come below the shoulder joint, it is radial nerve. In the shoulder joint, it is axillary nerve. This question has been asked in various exams, and you should know. Finger drop with no wrist drop. See, wrist is normal, the fingers alone become weak, could not be extended. So what now would have been it? Yeah, it is posterior interosseous nerve injury. Okay, feature of radial nerve injury at spiral groove means high radial nerve injury. High radial nerve means above elbow, low radial nerve means below elbow. So what you get? Thumb, finger, and wrist drop. Pointing index we don't know. Sensory loss over deltoid is axillary nerve, that is regimental badge area. Wrist drop will be there definitely. So the best answer is C. Okay. Which of the following statement about radial nerve palsy is not true? It supplies low radial nerve palsy, means at or below elbow joint. Which muscle is supplied? Which muscle is supplied by the radial nerve above elbow? It is brachyradialis. Brachyradialis supplies above elbow. I will give you the picture. See, this is brachyradialis. So, when injury is happening here, this muscle will be spared. So, brachyradialis will not be a problem when you get low radial nerve palsy. Okay, posterior interosseous nerve is injured in. I haven't told you about this. So, you look at this picture. What is this? Show elbow joint. This is ulna and this is head of radius. What fracture? Where the head of radius get dislocated. It is Monteggia fracture. The Monteggia fracture, you get ulnar nerve fracture and the head of the radius will get dislocated. So, when the head of the radius get dislocated, the first structure to near the radial head is posterior interosseous nerve. So, in Monteggia fracture dislocation, you should expect posterior interosseous nerve injury. Clear? Fine. So, this one sensory, the medial 1.5 is by ulnar nerve and lateral 3.5 by median nerve and the palmar aspect. And the dorsal aspect, the lateral 3.5 by radial nerve. I told you na radial nerve, and the tips of the tip of the index finger is supplied by median nerve, and this tip of the index finger is supplied by ulnar nerve. That is known as autonomous zone, because that is the area which is exclusively supplied by that particular nerve. Okay. We will move on to ulnar nerve. Ulnar nerve is known as musician nerve because it supplies all the small fine movements, muscles are supplied by ulnar nerve. I have already told you that it is have a sensory and motor functions, and it supplies two group of muscles, interosseous muscles. Interosseous muscle function is palmar interosseous, dorsal interosseous. Palmar interosseous adduction, dorsal interosseous abduction. So, when you have a ulnar nerve injury, the abduction and adduction of the fingers will be lost. And I told you that you have a lumbricals. It supplies medial two lumbricals. Lumbricals to the index finger and lumbricals to the little finger and ring finger. What is the function of lumbricals? Lumbrical muscle function is to flex the metacarpophalangeal joint and extend the interphalangeal joint. I think I have a picture. Yeah, this is the function of lumbricals. You can easily remember, it looks like a L, okay, lumbrical L. So, the function is to flex the metacarpophalangeal joint and to extend the interphalangeal joint. If you have a medial two lumbricals alone paralyzed, what will happen? The flexion of the metacarpophalangeal joint will not happen. So, it will go for hyperextension, and the extension of the interphalangeal joint will not be possible. So, they will go for flexion. So, in ulnar nerve injury, you will have a hyperextension of the metacarpophalangeal joint and hyperflexion of the interphalangeal joint. So, that is known as claw hand, partial claw hand, because medial two lumbricals are supplied by ulnar nerve. So, in ulnar nerve injury, you will have only medial two, the medial half of the medial two lumbricals paralysis, giving rise to hyperextension of the metacarpophalangeal joint and hyperflexion of the interphalangeal joint. And I just want to tell you, there are this one I told you earlier, and I told you that adductor pollicis is the thenar muscle which is supplied by ulnar nerve. There is one more deep head of the flexor pollicis brevis which is again supplied by ulnar nerve. Okay, sometime they will ask you. So, in claw hand is otherwise known as intrinsic minus deformity. Intrinsic muscles, minus means paralysis, plus means overactivity. You get intrinsic plus deformity in cerebral palsy, where the spasticity of muscle will go for intrinsic plus deformity. This is intrinsic minus deformity. Ulnar claw hand is paralysis of the lumbrical muscle. Lumbrical muscle paralysis, you get claw hand. So, when you have a medial nerve which is supplying the lumbricals of index finger and middle finger, you get all four lumbricals paralysis and you get the total claw hand. And the primary problem in the claw hand is hyperextension of the metacarpophalangeal joint. So, you have to prevent the hyperextension. So, you have to flex the metacarpophalangeal joint. So that is by using what is known as knuckle bender splint. That splint will flex. This is known as knuckle. Metacarpophalangeal joint is known as knuckle. You bend the knuckle. So that is known as knuckle bender splint. So knuckle bender splint is temporary splintage for claw hand cases. You understand? Fine. No, no, no. Till we don't know what type of nerve injury a patient is suffering. So, if nerve is recovering, till then you have to apply this. If you are contemplating any surgery, the full recovery will take some time. So, till then you have to use this. See, the splintage is always temporary. You cannot wear this for throughout your life. It is not possible, not needed.